Hello, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Gibson's Bookstore Remote. I am Elizabeth of Gibson's Bookstore, and I am very pleased to be welcoming you this evening to a virtual event with Liz Michalski and the launch week of her new book, Darling Girl, which is kind of creepy and it'll like grab you by the throat. It just makes you shiver. We are joined in conversation tonight by Kat Howard, who is a writer of fantasy, science fiction, and horror, who lives and loves and writes near us in New Hampshire. Kat and Liz will be in conversation. They are moderated by Gibson's own Ryan. Hello. Tonight, we are very pleased to have you all. Welcome us. Darling Girl is available from Gibson's Bookstore, and we are happy to get it to you any way you like. You can come in and shop. You can order it online. You can call us, carrier pigeon. They're all signed, which is great. Liz is near enough to us that we could arrange for the books to be signed. So if you order from us, they are signed. They're beautiful. She used a very sparkly Sharpie. It was great. This is a wonderful book. As you can tell by our advanced reading copy, it was well loved by the staff. This is great. And I think as we welcome you here, we're going to start as well with Ryan telling us a little bit about how this event came to be, because it was just a wonderful story. So we shall begin. Ryan, tell us how this happened.
So this is like my favorite thing ever. I was working out back, the mail came in and my coworker said, "Oh, there's an advanced reading copy for you." And I was like, "Okay, cool. This looks cool. There's a letter inside." And now usually when you get a letter with an advanced reader copy, it's like a form letter. "Dear bookseller, we hope you like this book," right? Very simple. It might have like a little blurb on it. I usually like read a couple sentences and set it to the side. But the first sentence of this one caught my eye because I realized this was not a form letter. This was a personal letter to Gibson's Bookstore. And I started reading it. If you have seen the TikTok, let me know in the chat. Probably you're here from TikTok. I made a whole video about it. It was this beautiful letter from Liz talking about how pre-pandemic she had stopped into Gibson's Bookstore. She was looking for something to read on her upcoming flight that would make her forget that she was terrified of flying. And my coworker brought me over. I realized this as I was reading the letter. I was like, that was me. Brought me over, and I recommended one of Kat Howard's books, very likely An Unkindness of Magicians.
This is the copy right here.
Yep. And Liz goes on to say that she bought a couple of Kat Howard's books. She read them on the plane, could not stop reading them, continued reading them on the plane, has since read everything of Kat's, and that now she had this new book coming out, and it was blurbed by Kat Howard, at which point we all just collectively burst into tears because that's the coolest full circle story. Like, what? So I was just, I got to that point and I was like, I have to film this. I have to make a TikTok about this. This is too perfect. This is like a bookseller's dream, right? So I make this TikTok. I talk a little bit about what the book is about, which I hadn't read yet, but Liz was kind enough to, include some blurbs. This is kind of what it's about. And I was like, this sounds really good. Like a dark Peter Pan story. This sounds awesome. And that TikTok went maybe not viral, but viral for us. It's currently sitting at about 17,500 views, which for, an indie bookstore on TikTok, that's pretty good. And within the first week, we had about 30 pre-orders of Darling Girl. And it just, I was like, hey, you know what? I know Kat Howard. Kat Howard is one of my customers. She comes and hangs out at my store. Like, hey, wait a minute. Hey, Liz, would you be interested in an event with Kat Howard? And now we are here. It is happening. And I am so delighted. I devoured Darling Girl. I passed it along to all of my coworkers. We all devoured it. It is so good and so dark, and you guys are going to love it. Your copies are on the way. I personally shipped them if you ordered one from us. So they're in good hands. They're on their way to you. You're going to love it. But I want to kick this off to Liz and Kat to chat a little bit about. Liz, why don't you tell us a little bit about Darling Girl?
Okay, well, first I have to say that I relentlessly stalked Kat Howard through like every contact I had. And she has been very gracious and very kind. And I absolutely love her book, An Unconscious of Magicians. I'm waiting for the next one. My favorite story by her is The Green Knight's Wife, which I think is in Cathedral of Smoke and Bone.
Myth and Bone.
Myth and Bone. Okay. All right. So like, if you haven't read her stuff, please go and read it now, because it is absolutely phenomenal. And now I'm sorry, I forgot the original question in my fangirl squeeing.
You were going to tell us about your excellent book.
Oh, right. Okay. I'm sorry. So my book is a dark, not exactly a retelling, but it's kind of a modern reimagining of Peter Pan. If Peter Pan actually had grown up and lived in our time. And it's told from the perspective of the Darling women, or one Darling woman in particular.
And first of all, I just want to say I kind of missed the whole part where like you are afraid of flying, which so am I. And so the fact that like the book helped you like not be afraid of flying makes me feel like even just cheerier about this whole thing, because like that is just okay, I did my job right.
You did. You absolutely did. So thank you for that.
That's lovely though. This is great. It's so much fun to meet you and to talk with everyone about this. Your book is really marvelous. I am a sucker for a good retelling. And the thing that a couple of the things that I loved about your retelling was, first of all, what you just said, that this is a focus on the Darling women. And the family and the way that they interact with each other, and the way that they the way this story reverberates through all of their lives, because it's not just a story that they lived in your world, it's a story that is kind of a known thing also. And I was wondering if you wanted to start by talking a little bit about the choice to have that be part of the focus of your book.
I think one of the things that I am really interested in, I actually was talking with some writing friends about this last night, is how when you become a parent, you go from being the main character to being the sidekick.
Oh,
and it doesn't happen all at once. It happens, because when your kids are little, you are the sun, and everything kind of revolves around you. And then they get to be teenagers, and you are no longer the warm focus of their world. You are kind of the moon, or the ancillary star that kind of orbits them. And it was really interesting for me from that perspective, to when I reread Peter Pan, to think about, well, what were the Darling women, what was Mrs. Darling doing all that time? It's really clear from the way that J.M. Barrie writes about her that she's this very she has a very interesting inner life. Mm-hmm. He talks about how she was like a collection of the boxes that you get from the Far Orient, where you open one and there's always another one inside it, except for the last one, which no one can ever access.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, it's a bit. If you haven't read if people have not read the original Peter Pan, you really should, because it's really short. It's, I think, 240 pages approximately. But it's moving, and it's beautiful, and it's sad, and it's poignant, and it's also very chilling. But anyhow, I was reading it and I was thinking, well, what was Mrs. Darling doing during all that time? What was she thinking? And at the end of Peter Pan, when Barrie writes that Peter Pan comes back, but Wendy is too old to go, and her daughter goes, what is she thinking? What is she feeling? As Jane, first of all, how does she let her daughter fly off like that? But second of all, what is she thinking, and what is she feeling? And what are the subsequent Darling women feeling as Peter Pan comes for each subsequent generation? So
I really loved that focus. It was something that was really resonant for me as I read. And I kind of wanted to ask, I know this is sort of a where did you get your ideas from question, but what was it about Peter Pan or about Barrie's writing in particular that drew you to this story, both in terms of the original and in terms of wanting to write your own spin on it?
So this is like the crazy answer, but I think that most of the creative people I know kind of give their brains a really rich and varied diet of everything and then kind of get out of the way and see what happens. And I actually had this crazy dream. I've always been like this insane dreamer, with just incredibly intense dreams that I remember. And I dreamed one night that there was a girl in a stone tower with no roof, but no doors. And she was in, Wendy blue, and she was hooked up to all these machines. And there were these boys in Peter Pan green who kept flying in and out of the turret through the windows saying, well, what will happen to us now? Who will we sacrifice next? Who will take her place? And I woke up and I thought, well, that's kind of creepy.
Yeah.
And I hadn't read Peter Pan in a long time. I mean, it had been years. I had seen the 2003 Peter Pan movie, which is my favorite out of all of them. I absolutely love it. But it had been like years, like 5 or 6 or more years. So I pulled out Peter Pan, my very worn copy of Peter Pan, and I reread it. And then I started reading about Jay and Barrie's life, and how, kind of bizarre and sad that was. And it just kind of all came together from there.
I can see somebody in the panel saying they have chills. I do too, though. That was just, that's amazing. I love that story. That's really great. Okay, so you actually just hit on one of the other questions that I was planning to ask. So this is going very well. I know there's a lot of different interpretations, versions, staging of Peter Pan all over the place. I remember when I was little, I was obsessed with the musical version with Mary Martin flying around and the Captain Hook who did all his evil plans with dances. Like that was the best. I wanted to make up a dance that had an evil plan that went with it. And so you were mentioning the 2003 movie is your favorite. Do you want to talk a little bit more about the different ones you've loved or not loved?
I mean, I think it's really hard to make a bad Peter Pan movie. And that's one of the things I find fascinating about the book is that, this came out in the early 1900s. And it is something that we still, versions are still being made of it. Mine obviously, but there's a bunch of others out there. Movies are still being made, and the language of it, Neverland, and the Peter Pan syndrome, and all that, and Tinkerbell has gone into our, has become part of the vernacular in a way that almost nothing else has. I mean, I love Lord of the Rings. I'm a huge Lord of the Rings fan, but we don't talk about The Hobbit or Mordor the same exact way. It's not used in casual conversation the way that we say, he has Peter Pan syndrome, or
Right,
they're off
right.
in Neverland. I think that Barrie's book is brilliant because every single word in it matters, but there's also this space between the words, if that makes sense, or space between the sentences. It's, one of the comparisons I use for it is that it's not a full-fledged oil painting. It's a charcoal sketch.
Okay.
And so it leaves room for the reader to bring their experiences and their thoughts to it, because the characters are so beautifully imagined, but there's still room for you as a reader to think about them off the page and think about their history and think about what they've done or what they're doing. And I think that just brings a ton of creativity to it, which is why, there can be a movie like Hook, which I also love, which is hysterical and fun, and also kind of poignant. And the 2003 version, which I think is just, the imagery in it is just absolutely beautiful. And the actor who plays the father in Captain Hook, I can't think of his name, but he was the father in Harry Potter. He was Draco's dad, is brilliant in it. He's chilling, because he plays both those roles so well. And that is just kind of two sides of the same coin, because Captain Hook is clearly the grown-up in Peter Pan. But he's not, for me, as an adult now. As a kid, he was always the bad guy. But as an adult now, I see he's not really the bad guy. He's just the adult in the room who has to do things like say, you have to grow up. You can't keep flying around like this. So I find all of the versions beautiful.
I love that. I really love what you said about there being space in the story, space for the reader to find things. It seems like that's maybe one of the things that would help a writer or someone else who is trying to find their own things, find their things in a retelling or in work within a relationship with that text. So I want to talk about some of the choices that you made in the book, and I'm going to be very careful not to be spoilery. I know we're like super early, but as we've said, one of the choices that you made was that there is a grown-up Peter Pan here, and so I'm very curious about what was the sort of process that made you say, yes, this is a thing that I'm doing.
I was talking with another writer about it, and we were just going over the book a little bit, and we were talking about, so Peter Pan to me, can I give a long answer? Is a long answer okay?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I know, I love Neil Gaiman. Neil Gaiman is one of my absolute favorite writers of all time. And my favorite book by him is The Graveyard Book, which I used to listen to with my kids every summer. We drive from Massachusetts to Connecticut every summer, and it's one of my favorite times because my kids, when they were little, were just strapped in the car seat, and I knew where they were, and everybody was happy. And we listened to audiobooks all the time. And every summer, it became a tradition to listen to The Graveyard Book, which probably makes me a very bad parent, because if you've read The Graveyard Book, it's a pretty violent beginning.
It's marvelous. I don't think
it's
this makes
beautiful.
you a bad parent at all, though. It's such a good story.
But my kids were listening to it in like 3rd grade. Okay, so they,
they're clearly fine.
Yeah, I think so. But but we would listen to it every summer, and then the last couple of years, my children are older; they're 20 and 17. But the last couple of years, I couldn't listen to The Graveyard Book anymore, because it made me cry. Like, I would hear it, and sometimes my daughter would play it just to make me like tear up, because I realized it's not about a little boy growing up and having fun in a graveyard with ghosts and his, friendly vampire. It's a metaphor for childhood and growing up and leaving the people that you love behind and having to go out in the world. So I can't listen to it anymore. But there are luckily lots of other Neil Gaiman books that I can listen to. And The Ocean at the End of the Lane is one of my other favorites. I listen to it all the time. And somewhere in there, when I was listening to it, he has a line in it that says something like, all small children think they are gods. And I was like, oh, that's really true. And if you look at a toddler, they think that they're the center of the universe.
Right.
And they want what they want, and they want it now. And you cannot tell them that they cannot have it, because their want is just all they are. They're just made up of want. And I thought about Peter Pan, because Peter Pan is kind of like an overgrown toddler in the book. He thinks he's a god, and he wants what he wants when he wants it. And he doesn't necessarily have the finesse that you get when you get older, where you may want something desperately, but you're adult enough to say, I can't have that because it might hurt someone, or I can't have that because it's, painful for someone else. Peter Pan wants what he wants, and he wants it when he wants it. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be really interesting if the stories say that he can't grow up, but they don't say that he doesn't get older?
Oh, yes. Oh, that. I need to go back and reread your book. Excuse me, we're done talking. I have to go read now. No, that's great. And that really makes me think a lot. Before I get too distracted in my thinking, one of the other things that I really loved, that actually the thing that grabbed me from the beginning, was that there's so much science in this book. Which it's not like a textbook. There's not going to be a quiz. Everybody in the audience can calm down. But one of the things that you did was you took I won't grow up, I'm going to be a kid forever. And you made that a sort of very science, very lab work, but also very right now with our fascination of use this skin cream and you'll look young forever kind of thing. And I think that sometimes we don't necessarily see the fantastic being turned into the scientific in that way. And I loved it. I thought it was really, really well done. But again, I just sort of want to be like, Liz, tell me why you did this cool thing.
I think it's so interesting that so much of what is in the book is actually so close to being, actual science. When I was noodling around trying to think about what I wanted Holly to do, I knew that I wanted, because the other part of it too is that Holly is in a business where people don't want to look older. They don't want to grow up.
Right.
So it's kind of like the flip side of Peter Pan, right? But there is all this crazy stuff. Like there's this, I suppose it's not crazy, but there's this cosmetics company where they actually take your blood and they mix, and you can look it up, like they say in Bull Durham. They mix it in with, different, I want to say potions, that's not the right word, but different formulas. So you have a serum that actually has your platelets in it that is supposed to keep you kind of looking, young and dewy and all that. And I used to write a long time ago for an organization called the National Order of Rare Disorders. And I was fascinated by how many of the things that we see in science fiction, in terms of like, vampires and werewolves and things like that, actually kind of resemble some of the diseases that, unfortunately, a very small group of people in the world have. And how the superstition around those may have in part spawned some of the stories. So
that's fascinating. Yeah, I think it worked really well. And like I said, that was definitely one of the things that hooked me, because it felt so organic, both to the story you were telling, but also as a way of taking an element from the original story and twisting it just enough to make it like, oh, look, here's this in a different way. Look what we can do with it. And so that was really fun. It was really fun for me as a writer, watching another writer work to read that. I was wondering also though, was there anything that as you were writing, as you were thinking about this story, as you were thinking about these characters, was there anything that sort of surprised you that came out differently than you were expecting, or that went in a different way, or
I think I wound up having a lot more sympathy for Peter Pan at the end of it, in the end of, like, I don't know how many drafts, than I had at the beginning, because in the beginning when I wrote it, I felt like he was just a villain. And at the end, I thought, he is a villain, but he is probably a villain because of his life circumstances. And if his life had started, because the original Peter Pan, it's, that's not a spoiler. The original one, the way J.M. Barrie writes it, is he heard his parents, or he heard his mother talking about him growing up. And he decided that he never wanted to grow up, so he ran away. But I, did this very elaborate backstory for him in my head where, that's the story that he tells everybody. He didn't want to grow up. Mm-hmm. But in reality, his mother was somebody who, was not in great circumstances. And didn't want him, and was trying to kind of leave him basically on a doorstep somewhere. And when he comes back and she's a little bit more prosperous, he sees that there's somebody else in his place, which is what happens in the book. He flies back in the original Peter Pan. He flies back, looks in the window, and there's another child in his room, and the window shut. And I thought, he's somebody who has just really never been able to fill that hole. He's just a big ball of wanting, because there's never been enough since those days to kind of fill him up. Mm-hmm. So if he can't fill it up, then he's going to make sure that nobody else gets to have what they want either. So
right.
That was, finding sympathy for him was kind of, it was interesting. It was kind of fun.
Did you, when you read the original, did you like Peter as a character in the original? Did you have sympathy for him there?
I liked him when I was a kid. I mean, I think when from what I remember, he's just such a fun character because, when you're a kid, he flouts all the conventions. He's got the kids out past their bedtime. They're flying out in London in their pajamas, having a great time. They go to an island where, they can sleep outside, in trees and huts. And it's just, it's like every little kid's fantasy. Mm-hmm. And to get to run away from the parents and not have to do what they're told. But I think as an adult, when I read it, he's really pretty chilling. I mean, there's a a line at the end of the book where Wendy says something like, and so Peter has been gone for a while, and then he comes back to visit, and Wendy says, and where's Tinkerbell? And he's like, who's Tinkerbell? And she's like Tinkerbell, your best friend who loves you and has, supported you. And he's like, yeah, I think she probably died. They don't live very long. There's somebody new. And I just was like, oh, that's chilling. That's really kind of horrific.
Yeah. So I'm going to make you play favorites some more now. Who is your favorite character in the original? in the original story? You don't have to pick favorites with your own characters. That's too mean. I'm not that bad.
Oh, that's hard. I always felt bad for Captain Hook. I don't know if he was I think Tinkerbell is probably my favorite because she's just so sassy, and she's tiny, and she gets into it with Wendy, and then she gets into it with the pirates. But I always really felt a lot of sympathy for Captain Hook. I always felt like he was very misunderstood.
Excellent. Let's see here. Oh, all of my other questions have favorites in them too. Apparently I was working on a theme today. But I guess one of the things that I wanted to talk about is a sort of, I guess, what was it that not specifically this story, to retell this story, but what attracted you to the idea of retelling stories in general? Because this is something that I work with a lot too. So I'm always really interested in hearing what drives other people to sort of find their own way through familiar stories.
I think that there's probably two things. I think one is that for me, there's stories that I've absolutely loved that I haven't wanted to end. And I think of one great example is Frodo at the end of The Lord of the Rings when he goes off to the Undying Lands. And it's, when I was a kid, I spent, so many hours trying to figure out a way that he could come back, and we could have more adventures with him. And I think that the books that last for me are the ones where there's an ambiguous ending, where there's room for you to imagine what happens to the character off the page. I always kind of say that I think, my favorite books are snapshots rather than movies. So it's a snapshot of a specific period of time in a character's life.
Okay.
And there's stuff that comes before, and there's stuff that goes after, but you don't necessarily get to see it on the page.
Got it.
And I think that, it's not so much a retelling for me, it's a stretching of what happens from the original, just maybe, looking at the time period a little bit differently, or bringing it to life in a different way, if that makes sense.
No, that's really, I love the idea of stretching it, of stretching the story, because for me, it's a lot of where are the places between, which I think is maybe a little bit of the same kind of idea. Where is there room for me to come into this story and sort of push at things and see what's there.
Exactly. And plus I think that, like, especially the stuff that I love, like the fairy tales, they're so old, but they're so current. They all have messages that, if you just change the time and place, still resonate today.
Yes.
It's stay out of the woods, it's don't trust strangers, it's beware of murderous relatives. It's just the just all those things that make such good stories today too.
Right. Yeah. And they translate well, because there's so much ambiguity, and like that the characters and stories, we know them so well, or at least we think that we do, and so we can bring that resonance with us when we're writing them, like, because you have an audience who thinks they already know what's going to happen, and then you can say, except maybe what if it doesn't? Except maybe what if this other thing happens instead? And can you look at things differently now that you know that this other thing happened? And I think that's really, I think it works very well in terms of telling a story, I think.
And you bring, and I think that brings like readers bring a shorthand to the story. So they have their notes. You're speaking a common language.
Yes.
So you don't have to completely reinvent everything either,
Yeah, it makes it a really, there's a lot of discussion of, that a book really isn't a monologue, it's a dialogue with the writer and the reader. And so when you're having that dialogue and you already have that common language, that shorthand, I think it makes for a really interesting reading and writing experience.
I think so too.
What was your favorite part of writing the book? I know we're back to favorites, I know, but
I think probably being done. I
Valid.
For everyone at home, that is the most honest answer you will ever get out of a writer. There you go.
it took a lot of drafts and a lot of help to get it where it was. I was really lucky. I had some, great early readers. I had great agents. I have great editors. But there were a lot of drafts, and it was, and you never think. I mean, I guess you are probably the same way, but it's never done. It's just, it is as good as you can make it.
Yes. Yeah.
And you have to let it go, and at some point I will look at it and, I haven't actually been able to read it through yet because I'm still too close to it.
Mm-hmm.
But at some point I'll look back and I'll be, oh, why did I do that? Or, oh, why did I do that? So right now I'm trying not to read it and just enjoy, having it be finished. But the other thing I really liked was I went back and I wrote some of the softer scenes for Holly. And that was fun. And then I think on one of the last couple of drafts, I was able to go in and just put some fun things, like little, not Easter eggs so much, but just references to different books and movies and places that I really like. And I really enjoyed doing that too. That was really definitely entertaining for me.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of that, the going through and being like, well, I just wrote a very bad thing, and so I didn't like doing that. So now I get to write myself a little treat and put in something fun that's just for me.
Yep, exactly. And even if nobody else gets it, if no one else says, "Oh, I recognize that line from that movie," or I've heard that, it's still kind of fun to have it there.
Exactly. Yes. But yeah, that I liked being done. I like being done. Done is good. Says the person who is definitely not done right now. What are you working on next?
So I'm still kind of staying in the fairy tale wheelhouse right now. I'm just about 30 or 40 pages into something new that I really like, but it's at that stage where I feel like I feel like I am in Winnie the Pooh and I'm sneaking up on it. How Tigger does that, and I'm afraid if I'm too noisy, it is going to run away. So I'm trying to just kind of tiptoe up very, very quietly and see how that goes.
Good. Well, good. Very good luck tiggering. I can't wait to see what you have.
Thank you.
Let's see here.
I will just pop in and say, audience members, put questions in the chat. In the last few minutes, we will ask all the audience questions. So pop those in there. We're watching them. We're gonna ask them. Don't worry.
One thing we had talked about was a little bit about Jay and Barrie.
Yeah, that was.
So I actually, for the audience, I relentlessly, in addition to relentlessly stalking Kat Howard, I got to email with her last week, which was just like such a huge thrill for me. So we were going back and forth about, things about that time period that we really liked. And we talked a little bit about Jay and Barrie, who I think, he had such a sad and interesting life. Peter Pan actually came out in a lot of people who read the original Peter Pan don't know this, and I didn't know it either when I started. Peter Pan actually was part of another story called The Little White Bird, which if we read it through today's lens, and it's hard to go back for me and look at things today and say, oh, that's terrible or that's really creepy, because the lens that the society used when it was written was different. Having said that, going back and looking at it from this point of view, it's extremely creepy. It is about a man who kind of becomes obsessed with a little boy and wants him all to himself, and talks about having, the mother out of the way and winning her trust so he can woo her and things like that. And Peter Pan is a short little story that he tells in the middle of it. And then that became its own book, and then it became the play. But Barrie's mother, I believe, was one of 8 children. And when she was 7 or 8, her mother passed away, and she kind of became the head of the female household at that point. And his older brother, David, who was kind of the golden boy, died in a really tragic skating accident. It was really unexpected. And his mother basically took to her bed for the next, however many years, and had nothing to really do with the kids. And it was so bad that Jay and Barrie would dress up in his dead brother's clothes and go and stand in her room and imitate his brother and try and whistle the way she did and put his hand in his pockets the way he did. And his mother would say, "Oh, is that you, David?" And he would say, "No, it's just me." And when you know that history, it kind of informs the whole part about Peter Pan, not growing up.
Right. Yeah, that's I remembered I'd read both of them for a course in college, but I haven't read recently, although now I kind of want to go back and do that because that's the kind of nerd person that I am. But yeah, I think how much did you get into thinking about Barrie and his life, and was this a book that took a lot of research and stuff for you? It sounds like maybe it was.
I definitely got obsessed with Barrie. He had, it's really hard looking back from today to figure out who he really was. In fact, a friend recently sent me a podcast about him. It was not about him. It was on Radiolab, and it was about stress. And it talked about how the unrelenting stress of those early years probably contributed to his stunted growth, because he was not super tall. He was like, I think maybe 5'4", somewhere in there. He really didn't develop physically. There's a theory that he really, never kind of went through a full puberty. He was just this little tiny guy, and he wound up meeting the David Lewin's family and becoming kind of obsessive with the kids. And it was this really crazy story where the father of that family got very, very sick and died. The mother, a few years later, got very, very sick and died. And J.M. Barrie kind of swooped in and took over the kids. And there's, some people have written that, it was a super charitable thing that he did. And other people have written that, there's a chance that he actually transcribed the letter from the mother saying what she wanted to have happen to her children incorrectly, so that he became the guardian. And he was super, the stuff about his interactions with those four boys is definitely kind of, it would be unnerving today if you were reading about it.
Gotcha. And now, and you mentioned that Peter Pan was also not original. You talked about adaptations before, but you mentioned just now that it was a play as well as a story originally.
Yeah, so it was in The Little White Bird, and then I believe from there he pulled those parts out and made them and expanded them and made them Peter Pan the book, and it also became a play. And I think that the play was really his, it was a huge, huge success for him. And I think that that's where a lot of the popular images of Peter Pan come from.
So it seems like, from what you said at the beginning, like this is a very adaptable story. This is a story that has a lot of pieces, a lot of play, a lot of give in, and it was true from the very beginning. Like you just, even in its original conception, it was three different things from the same writer, that he was finding different things in his own story as well, which is really fascinating when you think of like, okay, and we're going to keep on telling this, and we're going to keep on telling. We're still finding things.
Right. And the four boys really, they were just tragic. The entire family, I think the oldest son died in the war. The second son was away at college and he drowned. And there's a theory that it was actually suicide because the water was not super deep. He was a really good swimmer. The third son, who I believe was the one that Peter Pan was most closely based on, stepped in front of a train deliberately and died. And then the last son burned a lot of the correspondence that was between Jay and Barrie and the boys. So it's just, I think that there's like a whole novel for somebody in there too.
Seriously. All right.
On that note.
On that cheery note, do we want to do some audience questions?
It feels like that might be a good time to do that, I think.
Excellent. So let me see. I had seen a question earlier that you answered half of. It was Jessica's question. Or was it Jessica? Someone asked your favorite characters in Peter Pan, and then they did ask your favorite characters in Darling Girl, which Kat let you off the hook. But I'm curious if you had a favorite character to write in Darling Girl.
Well, I love them all. like we say about our kids. And I do love both my children equally, just in case on the odd chance that they're watching. Yes, I do love you both equally. But Tinkerbell was a lot of fun to write because traditionally she doesn't speak in a way that most people can hear. So it was really fun to kind of physically to picture her almost like she was in a movie and be able to describe what she was doing and get her message across when Holly couldn't understand her. So that was definitely a lot of fun to do.
Yeah. Tinkerbell's amazing in this. Oh, there's your dog.
There's my dog. He's not here with me tonight, but that's how I torture him, and he's a very, very good boy.
Oh my gosh, that's the best dog.
He really is the best dog.
Look at his little flower crown.
And he's just looking at me like, I cannot believe you're putting me through this again.
What a good buddy. What is his name?
His name is Harley.
Harley.
And he's 12 years old, and he lets me dress him up all the time.
I love him.
He is perfect.
Thank you.
There was another question here from Lisa. Oh, my screen jumped. Hang on. Where did that go? Lisa said, I love how the different settings of Darling Girl were all so vibrant and real. Were there real places that helped inspire you?
Yes. So thank you, Lisa, for that question. I actually got to spend a semester in London when I was in college, and I worked for a member of parliament, which was just a phenomenally interesting experience. And there's a lot of like little places in there that I used to go to that I just love. So, the Galleria, was one of my favorite spots when I was there. Up the Peter Pan statue. I don't actually remember it from that trip, but on subsequent trips, I really enjoyed seeing that. There's a fabulous wine bar that I described in there. That's a real place too. So yeah, so definitely, and that was a fun part of it.
I really loved the like the cottage where they go. I thought that was a very vibrant, beautiful setting. I thought that was really cool.
Thank you.
We've got another question here. Liz, why do you find yourself drawn to fairy tales in your writing?
That is also a very good question. I think that they are the first things that I really loved reading. I was a late reader. I remember being in kindergarten and watching my peers be able to read and being horrified that I couldn't read. And I remember, the first books I really, really loved were the Chronicles of Narnia books. And I read them all in second grade, like clandestinely under my desk, and my teacher would come down and very gently shut the desk on the book. But I think there's something about that. And, at least when I was a young adult, there weren't a ton of books that had magic in them for adults, which is why I loved yours so much, Kat, because it's it's magic for grown-ups. And fairy tales have that magic, but somebody in it always pays a price. And I think that as an adult, that's kind of a metaphor for life. And you don't see that necessarily as a kid, especially not in the Disney versions. You see the shiny tiara, or you see the white horse in the castle. But as an adult, when you go back and you read them, the original fairy tales are really very dark. And I think that that's something that as an adult you recognize and you appreciate the light in it more because you're familiar with that darkness. So I think finding a way to write about that and balance the two is something that I really enjoy.
Yeah, I think that's great. I heard a quote today and I can't remember who said it, but it was something to the effect of someday you'll get old enough to read fairy tales again. And I was like,
exactly.
Yes. We've got another question here from Jessica. What is one book you wish you could read again for the first time?
Oh, just one? I think that's really hard. I don't know if I could choose just one. There's so many books that I read. Well, I guess probably, all right, The Graveyard Book. I wish I could go back and read The Graveyard Book and just enjoy it, or actually not even read it. I love to listen to anything Neil Gaiman reads because I heard him in Boston the other night, and he could read a phone book, and I would sit there and be perfectly happy and perfectly mesmerized. So I really wish I could go back and listen to The Graveyard Book all over again with my 2 kids strapped in the back seat of the car, and just relive that experience all over again.
I love that.
I love that. That's one fun thing about having 2 young kiddos is that I'm kind of experiencing that because I'm reading books to them for the first time, and I'm reading the book through a new lens for the first time, and so it's kind of like having that experience, and it's really fun. So
Yeah, it's magical. It's that I think for me is one of the biggest joys of having young kids, is that you get to experience that magic again.
Yeah.
And you're one step removed from it, but you can still feel it. And because they're your kids, you probably appreciate it more than you did when it was actually you.
Mm-hmm. We've got people just commenting that they love Holly and the Darling Women and definitely want more from them. I think that was possibly in response to talking about stretching out the story and how it's just a snapshot, and like, yeah, we could dive into their lives just endlessly. They're fascinating, amazing women. We've got a question here from Sarah. What was your most challenging moment when writing Darling Girl, and what was your favorite moment while writing?
So I think that there were 2 challenging moments for me. One, the biggest one was there is a scene in the book, and I don't want to give spoilers away, but it's pretty dark and pretty serious. It's pretty intense. And I had a friend reading it, and she was like, you either have to lay it all out on the page or you need to not have it. Like, you have to pick. You can do either one, but you need to do one or the other. That was actually Bryn Greenwood, who I know I told you that I would, share titles more slowly, but I can't remember the title of her latest book, but I love it. And she was right, and I think that it was really hard. I'm definitely not somebody who likes to put everything out there all the time, and especially when it's something kind of dark and not pleasant. But I think it was really good advice, and I think it really changed the trajectory of the book. And I think trying to make Holly more understood, because I think in my earlier drafts she was unlikable because of the decisions she was making. And the way I hope I ended it was that you may not always agree with her decisions, and you may not always like them, but you can understand why she's doing what she's doing, and you can recognize that she's doing it not for evil motives, but because she cares about the people she loves and she wants to protect them. And I think my favorite moments were going back and writing some of the lighter scenes, like Holly with her husband. Those are really kind of fun breaks to do.
Phenomenal. Well, I think Elizabeth will probably pop back in here in a second, but I just want to say thank you so much. This has been amazing. This book is phenomenal, everyone. I cannot recommend it highly enough. I devoured it. I read it in like 2 days and I couldn't stop talking about it. And I'm so excited that it's finally out and I can hand sell it to everyone. I'm just delighted.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for getting Kat Howard to come along for the ride. I'm still squeeing over here.
This was a blast, and I was just absolutely delighted to be able to celebrate your terrific book with you.
Thank you very much, Kat. I appreciate it.
Okay, so thank you very much to all of our audience members. This was so much fun. I like to end events with one last question, and that is, Liz, have your characters taught you anything?
Oh, so much. I think, aside from, try not to get older, I think that it was really interesting writing Holly Darling, because she is such a strong person. And I think that watching how I wound up kind of transforming her to soften her a little bit made me aware of just how strong women are perceived in society. And that's something that I still think about, especially right now. So.
Well, Darling Girl came out yesterday. We are very, very excited. This is, again, the worn staff copy that we have well loved. It came out yesterday. We are very, very excited to be pressing it into hands of people. Signed copies are available from Gibson's Bookstore. We put Liz to work yesterday signing a whole stack. So we are thrilled to get it out to you. If you are watching this later on YouTube, we got a bunch. We'll probably lure her back to the store to sign more at some point. And a thank you as well to Kat Howard, who is staring down a deadline.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'd like to have you come back, Kat, for the launch of it when that deadline is a distant memory. Maybe
so
we'll
pleased.
have Liz come be in conversation with you.
Yes, absolutely.
That would be so
For
fun.
sure.
So thank you so much to our audience members for joining us this evening. That's it for us. Have a great night, everybody.
Right.
Night. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.